Welcome back to another episode of Focus on K-12, EdTech and the Education Experience. I'm Doug Konopelko, Education Strategist for CDWG, and really excited to talk through interoperability, or in simpler terms, why EdTech stuff should just work, with Susan Bearden, who's the Director of Digital Programs at InnovateEDU. Let's dive in.
My name is Susan Bearden, and I am the Director of Digital Programs for InnovateEDU, which is a nonprofit dedicated to promoting the use of interoperable data systems in education. And I'm a former teacher, a former school technology director, and the former Chief Innovation Officer for the Consortium for School Networking.
Yeah, so you and I connected what feels like quite a few years ago now, right? When we were both doing instructional technology work. So excited to be able to continue this conversation now, 7, 8 years later. There's a popular meme right now on social media, the idea of tell me without telling me, right?
Mhm.
So since we're talking interoperability today, let's do the tell me without telling me, tell me you understand interoperability without telling me about interoperability.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story about a teacher named Monique who walks into her fourth grade classroom before school and sits down at her computer. And she opens up her web browser and she's taken to a student landing page, which displays real-time data about class attendance, behavior, and her class academic performance. So she clicks on the name of one of her students and is brought to a 360-degree profile page that has information about his attendance, behavior, star benchmark, performance level, and access score for English language learners at the top of the page. Graphic indicators show whether Mario is on track, whether he's falling behind academically, or whether he has exceeded a certain number of unexcused absences. And next to his picture, there's a tag indicating that Mario has an IEP. She's able to see his current academic goals and his progress towards achieving them. And after she welcomes her students to her class, she has them log into an online platform using Chromebooks and has them start working on their self-paced assignments. She does not need to reset a single student password because her district has implemented single sign-on, allowing her students to use their Google credentials to log into all of their online platforms. As they settle down to work, she remembers how much instructional time she used to lose helping students reset their forgotten passwords and is grateful that that problem is a thing of the past. So that is what a classroom might look like when it's able to use the power of interoperability.
I love that. And I feel like every teacher, student, and certainly instructional technology person can absolutely relate to the scenario that you unfolded there. So I noticed a few things in there that were interoperability, right? So maybe for people who aren't as familiar now, let's go into what are some of the main areas or facets of interoperability.
Sure. So the one that people are probably most familiar with, even if they may not realize it's interoperability, is single sign-on, which is the ability to use one set of login credentials, whether it's Google credentials or your district's Active Directory credentials, to log into multiple EdTech platforms. That's kind of the simplest form of interoperability. We like to call it the gateway drug to interoperability because that's often where districts go first, although it's worth noting that not all districts have implemented single sign-on. And as a former school tech director, I'm well aware of how much instructional time is lost dealing with lost or forgotten passwords. So that's kind of what most people are familiar with. But there's other ways that you can use interoperability. For instance, rostering. So for instance, I know that teachers use multiple EdTech tools in their classroom very often. And how many times have they had to upload rosters, Excel spreadsheets, CSV files of every single student in their class, or had the district do that at the district level? And then every time there's a new student that gets added or a student leaves and you have to wait for that student to get updated, or the teacher has to spend their time and do that manually. Well, with rostering, which is an aspect of single sign-on, the rosters are automatically updated. So for instance, if a student is updated in their student information system and assigned to your class, then that information is passed to the EdTech tool. So the teacher doesn't have to do anything to add the student to that tool. Another common area of interoperability is assessment data. So for instance, districts that have to upload assessment data to the states, or districts that want to show assessment data in one single place, like in that scenario that I was describing. That's an actual platform called the Learner Profile that is being implemented in some districts in Rhode Island. And what it does is it brings in all of those test scores, the different test scores, in one place, so the teacher can get a snapshot at that moment of time of how the student is doing, and they don't have to log into 3 or 4 different systems to check what their student scores are, and then download them into Excel spreadsheets, and do all sorts of manipulating magic in order to be able to draw the conclusions that they need to make assessments about what their students' needs are. And then another type of interoperability would be standards for interoperability between content and systems. For instance, packaging and exchanging digital learning materials and assessments so that they can go from one system and, for instance, be seamlessly imported into a learning management system, a course management system, or some other instructional management system. So that's not an all-inclusive list, but those are kind of some of the major ways in which interoperability is used in K-12 education.
Yeah, and it sounds like for the most part, what we're talking about is data, right? Whether in the form of hard data, like something like assessment data itself, right? Little data
Mhm.
pieces, or data as in, a user profile being moved back and forth between different systems, and sometimes moved multiple times from one system to another, to another, to another, right? Without having to, do something manually either every time, or do something manually every time you want to set up one of those systems, right? Because,
Exactly.
as you put it, when the magic happens, every programmer that works at a school district knows that, like, you're saying when the magic happens, that's when I'm sitting at my computer and I worked on that for 4 months, right? So, uh,
Exactly. It's like when interoperability works, you don't know it's there. It's just like when your school's internet is working. You're not thinking, oh, my performance is so slow. This video is taking forever to load. It just works. And that's what interoperability empowers teachers to be able to take advantage of data that lives in all of these different siloed systems, and look at them in one single location to help improve instruction.
Absolutely. So, your work now revolves around interoperability. So, give me a couple other use cases or examples, like real world, of what you're seeing in interoperability right now.
There's lots of different use cases for interoperable systems. For instance, there are some districts that are pulling in attendance data, and they are creating early warning attendance systems. So for instance, they can flag when a student has missed more than X number of days in a quarter, and they can automatically start implementing protocols in terms of reaching out to the home and trying to figure out, well, why is this student meeting so much school? Sometimes they can even see patterns like, oh, this student is always absent on Mondays. Well, what's going on with their family that might affect their ability to get their child to school on Mondays specifically? Another example would be the state of Wisconsin has a huge EdFi interoperability infrastructure. And when the pandemic hit, they were able to leverage that to get information about student internet access and device access to all of their schools, so that the schools knew what students they needed to reach out to in order to provide them with devices or to provide them with internet access. And another project that they're doing, which I think is really exciting, is, and it started before the pandemic, but they had started working with their state Department of Health to automatically download student vaccination records from the State Department of Health into student information systems. Well, that information, that could save school nurses hours of work entering that information into the system manually, or even trying to import it. So those are just a few of the examples of how districts are using interoperability. There's also ways to leverage, if for districts that are during the pandemic trying to figure out how to do attendance, you can use, there's a tool called the Google Connector that allow you to pull in usage data from Google Classroom. So to learn, to be able to draw attendance conclusions based on activity within the platform, not just did they show up for a synchronous Google Hangout, or did they turn in an assignment. So there's all sorts of possibilities once the infrastructure is in place.
So, I guess one of the big things that you've talked about already is that it's a time saver, right?
Yes.
Interoperability can save
Huge.
instructional time. What are some of the other instructional or otherwise benefits of building these interoperable systems?
I think teachers, so often they spend a lot of time logging into different platforms to be able to see how their students are doing. They may log into a platform that their district uses for math. They may log into a platform that their student uses for reading, or even within a subject, they may have 5 different platforms that they use for different reasons. And in order to get a sense of how that student is doing, they have to go in and log into 5 different platforms and take a look at how the student is progressing. With interoperable systems, you can see all that information in one place. And so that allows teachers to make intelligent decisions about all this siloed assessment data in one place, and to determine what's the best instructional practice. Where does the student need targeted assistance? Where's the student falling behind? Where is the student excelling, without having to look in all of these different systems, because it's so hard to get your eye in the big picture when you're having to scatter your attention in so many different places.
Yeah, and I think for people who are not as familiar with education, they might hear, well, why would a district have three different math systems, right? But you and I both know that when you're working in a district or you're working in a large organization like that, you'll have something that's specifically for state testing or related to state testing. You'll have something that's for the actual day-to-day instruction. You'll have
Yep.
something for benchmarking in between. And then you might have an additional resource. I'm thinking of like an online platform, like something like IXL, where they go for either remediation or just extra practice. So it's really not outside the realm of possibility that for one class there might be four different platforms that are all trying to get at a lot of the same information.
Exactly. And how much easier is it for the teacher if they can view all of that information in one place? And
Right.
same
And
for administrators as well.
true. And it lives at that time only in that program, right? Until you start to progress through using this interoperability and being able to pull all of that back together to sort of one area.
That's exactly right.
So where does the work of becoming interoperable live within a school district?
A lot of times it's considered an IT project, because obviously there are a lot of technical things that need to be done in the back end. But honestly, interoperability needs to include all the different departments in a school, everybody um, from like the counseling department to the curriculum and instruction to technology to all sorts of other departments, because um, in order to define what your use case is, you have to figure out what the needs are, because there's different interoperable standards and they all serve different purposes. And the first thing you need to do is figure out, what's our use case? What do we need interoperability for? And there you can then go on and figure out, okay, well, here are the standards that we need. Here's the user interface that we might want to have, and then go from there. So it really does have to be a district-wide initiative.
And it sounds like even though the work itself might live with a lot of the programmers in the IT department, the benefits are more distributed around the district, right? So the people who actually have the goals that you want to be reaching with interoperability aren't necessarily, holding the reins to make it happen.
That's exactly right. And that's why it has to be a district-wide process.
So if folks wanted to get started tomorrow, I'd say what would be a couple tips or resources that they could dive deeper into?
Definitely check out the Project Unicorn website. So, Project Unicorn is the name of our interoperability initiative. It involves a coalition of national organizations that are working to promote interoperability in K-12, focused on different stakeholders. And that's everybody from superintendents to educators to technology staff to instructional coaches. And if you go to projectunicorn.org, and specifically, if you click on the resources link, there's a menu at the top of the screen. You can search our database by either your by either your role or the type of resource that you're looking for. So for instance, if you're a school administrator, you could go in and you can look for resources about interoperability geared towards school administrators. There's tons of resources, not just that we've developed at Project Unicorn, but also that we make available from other organizations. And also you can email Project Unicorn at InnovateEDU.org with your questions. We can provide you with technical assistance or connect you with someone who can provide you with the technical assistance that you need.
Great. Susan, thank you so much for sharing this today. I'm excited to continue this work.
I am too. Thanks so much for having me, Doug.
Thanks for joining us today on Focus on K-12 EdTech and the Education Experience. If you enjoyed today's show, please feel free to like, subscribe, and click the little bell so that you get notified whenever we post a new episode. Or reach out to me on Twitter @dconopelco. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time as we focus on K-12.